Every word out of the judge's mouth dripped with condescension. "Mrs. Trump," he sighed, tapping his pen on the desk. "Let's keep this simple, shall we? Do you even understand the charges against you?" Laughter rippled through the courtroom. Melania sat still, her face unreadable. Klaus, the judge, leaned forward, his smirk widening. "I'll make it easy for you. Try to explain the case in your own words. Let's see if you can manage that." The opposing lawyer chuckled, shaking his head. "This is embarrassing," he muttered. Melania adjusted her papers. "I believe I have the right to present my defense without interruptions." Klaus waved a dismissive hand. Of course, of course. We'll let you pretend to be a lawyer for a little while." More laughter. The court was enjoying the show. Melania, unfazed, reached for her file. "I would like to present a key document." A clerk coughed loudly. "Your Honor, the document in question appears to be missing." The courtroom buzzed with whispers. Melania exhaled slowly. "Interesting. I expected this." The smirk on the judge's face flickered for a second. "What do you mean, expected?" he asked, his tone sharper now. Melania tilted her head slightly, her lips curling into the smallest smile. "Let's just say I came prepared." Silence. For the first time, the judge didn't have a comeback. The judge straightened in his chair. "Prepared for what exactly?" His voice was still arrogant, but there was a hint of unease now. Melania slid a folder onto the desk. "This is an official copy of the missing document," she said. "I had a feeling something might happen to the original." The courtroom fell silent. Klaus grabbed the file, flipping through the pages. His smirk vanished. "Where did you get this?" he demanded. Melania crossed her legs. "You'll find that it's notarized and time-stamped before this trial even began. A backup, Your Honor, just in case." The opposing lawyer, Dietrich, shifted in his seat. "Objection! This is highly unusual." Klaus hesitated. His plan had just crumbled. He forced a chuckle. "Fine, let's hear it. Enlighten us, Mrs. Trump." Melania leaned forward, her voice calm but razor-sharp. "According to case precedent, Mueller v. Schmidt, any attempt to obstruct legal evidence, such as losing a document, is grounds for judicial review. And yet, here we are." A few gasps echoed in the courtroom. The judge's jaw tightened. "That case is irrelevant?" Melania tapped the folder. "Page 14, Your Honor. I highlighted the part that proves otherwise." Klaus turned to the page. His fingers gripped the edges a little too hard. His eyes flickered with panic before he masked it with an awkward cough. The spectators, once laughing at Melania, now murmured among themselves. Then a side door opened. A man in a suit walked in, whispering something to Dietrich. The lawyer's face turned pale. Klaus noticed and frowned. "Something wrong, Dietrich?" Dietrich cleared his throat. "Your Honor, I need a moment." The judge exhaled through his nose. "Fine. Recess for 15 minutes. Melania simply smiled. Klaus pushed himself up from his chair, his fingers drumming nervously against the desk. He was starting to realize this was no ordinary case. During the recess, Melania walked toward the hallway. A few reporters hovered nearby, murmuring into their microphones. The air was tense. She barely made it 2 steps before a sharp voice called out, "Mrs. Trump." She turned. A well-dressed journalist stood there, a polite but firm smile on his face. "A word of advice," and he said, stepping closer. "Drop this case. Walk away while you still can." Melania studied him. "And why would I do that?" The journalist chuckled, lowering his voice. "You think this is just a courtroom battle? This isn't about legal arguments anymore. Some very important people don't want you winning." She didn't blink. "And who might those people be?" His smile widened. "Let's just say, the kind of people who don't lose." Melania took a slow breath. "I see." The journalist patted her arm. "Smart woman. Walk away." Then he turned and disappeared into the crowd. She stood there, the weight of the warning settling over her. Meanwhile, inside the judge's chambers, Klaus was pacing. Dietrich sat across from him, gripping the arms of his chair. "That document wasn't supposed to exist," Dietrich hissed. Klaus exhaled sharply. "I know that." Dietrich checked his phone. His face paled further. "What now?" Klaus snapped. Dietrich swallowed. "I just got word. Someone found the real evidence." Klaus stopped pacing. "What?" "The evidence," Dietrich repeated. "The real file. Someone smuggled it out of the courthouse basement. Klaus slammed a fist onto his desk. This is spiraling out of control. Dietrich wiped his forehead. We need a plan. Back in the courtroom, Melania calmly took her seat as the recess ended. The judge returned, looking noticeably tenser than before. He cleared his throat. Before we proceed, there may be a complication. Melania raised an eyebrow. Oh! Klaus gripped the gavel. New information has come to light. The court may need to reconsider some details of this case. Melania leaned back, folding her arms. What a coincidence, the audience whispered, sensing the shift. Klaus exhaled. Court is now in session, but for the first time it was clear. He wasn't the one in control anymore. The courtroom was tense. Klaus's grip on the gavel tightened. His usual arrogance was gone, replaced by a stiffness in his shoulders. Melania rested her hands on the table, her voice cool. You said there's a complication, Your Honor. I'd love to hear it. Klaus hesitated. He glanced at Dietrich, who gave him a slight shake of the head. Don't admit anything. The judge forced a smile. Just a minor administrative issue. Melania tilted her head. Ah, another misplaced document, perhaps? A nervous chuckle spread through the courtroom. Klaus ignored it. Proceeding as planned, let's move forward with the testimony. A witness was called, a former business associate of Melania. He was clearly uneasy. Dietrich stood. Mr. Bauer, you worked with Mrs. Trump, correct? The man nodded. Yes. Dietrich smirked. And would you say she had the expertise to handle complex legal matters? The man hesitated. Dietrich pressed on. Answer the question. A long pause. Then Bauer inhaled sharply and said, Actually, I would. The courtroom gasped. Klaus's head snapped up. Excuse me? Bauer turned to Melania. She handled contracts better than half the lawyers I've worked with. Shock rippled through the room. This was supposed to be a key witness against her. Dietrich's face darkened. That's not what you told us before? Bauer swallowed hard. Things change. Klaus clenched his jaw. Enough of this. He slammed the gavel. This witness is dismissed. Then the side doors creaked open. A tall figure strode inside. An older man, sharp suit, expression unreadable. The murmurs grew. Even Dietrich's face went pale. The man sat in the back, watching. Melania's eyes flicked toward Klaus. His hands had started to shake. She smiled. Klaus gripped the gavel like a lifeline. His eyes darted toward the man in the back of the courtroom. He knew exactly who he was. Melania, however, acted as if nothing had changed. Your Honor, she said, her voice steady. You seem distracted. Klaus straightened. Nonsense, let's proceed. Dietrich, still rattled, cleared his throat. Your Honor, I request a brief recess. Klaus shook his head. Denied. Dietrich swallowed hard. He was on his own now. Melania stood. In that case, I'd like to introduce something new into evidence. Klaus's nostrils flared. Absolutely not. Melania ignored him. She reached into her briefcase and pulled out a tablet. She tapped the screen. A video began playing on the courtroom monitors. A grainy recording appeared. Security footage from a private office. Klaus froze. On the screen, he was seen speaking with Dietrich. His voice crackled through the speakers. Make sure that file disappears. She won't win this case if she doesn't have the evidence. Gasps filled the room. The audience erupted. Dietrich's face turned ghostly white. This is doctored. Melania arched an eyebrow. Feel free to have forensic experts verify it, but we both know it's real. Klaus's hands trembled. This is highly irregular. Melania folded her arms. So is corruption. The man in the back row shifted forward slightly. His presence alone sent a shiver down Klaus's spine. The courtroom door swung open again. This time it was two uniformed officers. One of them approached the bench. Judge Klaus, he said, his voice firm. Step down. Effective immediately. The courtroom gasped again. Klaus's mouth opened and closed. I demand... The officer didn't wait. You're under investigation for judicial misconduct. Melania leaned forward, her voice just above a whisper. You thought this was just about mocking me? She smiled. You were never the smartest one in this room. The officers moved toward Klaus. Dietrich bolted up. Your Honor, We can fix this. The officer cut him off. Counselor, you might want to sit down. You're next. The courtroom exploded into chaos. Melania simply smoothed her skirt and gathered her papers. She had already won. The courtroom was in an uproar. Reporters scrambled to capture the moment. The once mighty Judge Klaus stood frozen, his face drained of color. The officers flanked him. "You're coming with us," one of them said. Dietrich, still in shock, sank into his chair. He knew his career was over. Melania adjusted her papers, completely unbothered. "Your Honor," she said, "it seems the court is in need of a new judge." Klaus glared at her. This isn't over." Melania met his gaze. "It is for you." The officers let him out. The heavy doors slammed shut behind them. The courtroom was silent. Then, as if on cue, applause erupted. Melania gathered her things, walking past Dietrich without so much as a glance. As she reached the doors, reporters swarmed her, microphones shoved in her face. "How did you pull this off? Was this your plan all along?" She simply smiled. "I let the law speak for itself." The cameras flashed. The world had just witnessed the impossible. Melania Trump, underestimated and mocked, had taken down a corrupt judge. And as Klaus sat in the back of a police car, staring blankly ahead, he finally understood. He had never stood a chance.